could say a lot, Nettie. But how this diary got through the last search, I really don't know. So perhaps it's best to generalize. Life, to say the least, is not pleasant. Always under the eyes of the sentries with their fixed bayonets on all sides. All one can say is that a few aren't as bad as the rest. But no day passes without someone getting a real beating up, for no reason, except the sentry feels the urge. I wonder if we will all seem like beaten dogs after months of this, always looking on all sides to see if there is a sentry and bowing if there is, lined up, counted and inspected 4 times a day like animals. And the sick. It's just inhuman. They're given no chance to get better, drag themselves to work. It's bitterly cold, yet if they stay in, they cannot wrap a blanket around them or lie down. And if they can walk, they're given the dirtiest jobs in the camp. It's getting harder to take it philosophically. One seems on the edge most of the time. But I must fight on and think only of the end.
Singapore fell to the Japanese in February of 1942. It was a humiliating defeat for the British. They'd completely underestimated their enemy and had presumed that the harbor city would be attacked from the sea. Instead, the Japanese came from behind, overland, many on bicycles, down the Malaya Peninsula. In a hasty retreat, the British fled on to Singapore Island, leaving the water supply on the mainland undefended. Within days, the British were forced to give up the fight and sign an unconditional surrender. More than 120,000 British subjects were taken prisoner. Ben Wheeler, my father, was one of them.
It's hard to realize that the Japs have well and truly beaten us, and it has all been done so efficiently and quickly. Nobody seems to have the least idea what they will do with us all. I'm sure that they never expected or wanted so many.
I was born after the war and never really knew what happened to my father as a prisoner. In 1978, I attended a reunion, looking for men who had known him during those years. He had been their doctor.
So did you come over on the England Maru with all these chaps?
No, I came over on the England Maru with the first consignment. We were the very first people. It was a camp especially prepared for the bad boys of the 11th Indian Division. And we landed here, landed in that...
Like my father, these men were eventually moved from Singapore to Taiwan, then called Formosa.
We was the elite.
Oh, yes, so you didn't have to make...
They were shipped up the coast in old cattle boats. Dad was in one called the England Maru.
October 28th, 1942. Wish I had a picture of this place. The nearest one can come to it is the picture one has of the old slave ships. 300 men in this hold. People in the center lying in the mud as the roof's not waterproofed and it rains twice a day. Terrible. Close and hot. All our clothes are wet and getting moldy. No place to attend the sick, let alone put them. Nothing could be worse than this voyage has been, Nettie. I'm beginning to wonder if I'll ever see you again.
The journey took 3 weeks, and when they docked in Keeloon, they were divided into different camps. Dad had lost 50 pounds in his first year of captivity. He'd had no contact with his family. After months in a camp near the coast, he was moved to Kinkasaki, a copper mining camp on the northeast corner of the island.
August 10th, 1943. What was ahead was a 6 to 7 mile walk, or rather climb, on a rough, rocky mountain road, winding, climbing all the way. I shall never forget it. The last long climb, I began to stumble and fall. Legs just gave out. However, I was able to pass on some of my kit and got there in a vertical position. We only had a 5-minute rest all day.
The camp was getting worse and worse. More men were getting sick, more men were dying, and we were looking ghastly, quite frankly. And suddenly the Japanese decided to have what they call thin man parades. We call them thin men parades. They'd line men up at night and they would pick out those who were thinnest. And we discovered that what they were going to do was send thin men away to camps which were in the southern part of the island, which we'd heard rumors about, but we didn't know. We'd even known that Major Wheeler's crowd had gone to another camp. And we surmised they weren't in a mine like we were, but we didn't know. And I remember when the first Thin Man Party was formed, and anything we were trying to do to get on that Thin Man Party, I remember standing there, pulling my cheeks in and pulling my body in, praying and hoping I'd be chosen, but I wasn't chosen. I was never chosen on the Thin Man Party. I stayed there the whole way through. However, the first party went away, and they were immediately replaced by a party of men who looked to us like, they looked to us like men who'd been in holiday camp, because they were brown, looked far fitter, and amongst the party was your father. And he came with this party from Taiwaku camp, number 1 camp. And it was great to have them in, because it meant new blood in the camp, new hope. They brought new rumors, news of friends who were at the camps, and a doctor, which was most important. As our doctor then was Captain Seed, who was working himself to a standstill. He was going down rapidly, and if we lost him, we thought we were going to be in real trouble. So we were delighted to see Major Wheeler arrive. And being a Canadian as well, it meant another facet in the camp, somebody else to talk to, somebody else who could bring a different approach.
First impression of the new camp. Very depressing. A real prison. Dark wooden huts jammed close together on a steep, rocky hillside, surrounded by a high brick wall. The hospital has no beds, no mattresses, and only 3 blankets per man. At present they are all on boards, certainly no more than 1.5 feet per person. To examine one, you have to climb on the platform and shift the next man. Began trying to get to know the patients, some 40 of them, most chronic, several mine injuries, a few severe. Men are working in a copper mine. Their troubles seem to have been the same as ours, but the work, hell, they tell me, has made the difference. 33 deaths, including 1 officer. Captain Seed has, I'm afraid, had a worse time than I. I'll take the hospital off his hands to begin with.
The camp was terrible in those days. You couldn't move without being beaten up. You couldn't go to the toilet without having to stop and salute the Japanese bow. If you didn't bow quick enough, you were beaten up. In fact, we used to keep a record in my camp of beatings and how many times you were bashed during a day. And I remember I won one day because I'd been bashed 9 times by these FORMOSA guards. You couldn't sit down. They'd come tearing in. You couldn't lie down. If you had to smoke, if you were allowed to smoke, you were able to smoke in one place where there was a box with water in it. In fact, there were so many regulations, you know, you just couldn't make a move. So when they announced working parties for the mine, you know, my squad was the first squad, and I was delighted to go, quite frankly. I'd had anything to get out of this damn place.
Now, you went down, if I'm not mistaken, exactly 1,700 steps. And when I say 1,700 steps going down, I don't mean steps that was made by cement, so that every step was perfect. You got one step this and one step that, so that you never knew what you was gonna. And at the same time, you had acid water dropping on you. Because of in these copper mines, it's copper and it turns into acid. You've got acid drips, and it stains all your skin, it stains all your clothes, if you never wore clothes anyway.
September 2nd, 1943. One of the causes of disability here as opposed to the other camps is bronchitis, some quite severe and all becoming chronic, likely due to the tremendous changes of temperature in the mine plus the wet and dust from drilling. In some spots it is so hot that men can only stay in a few minutes or they collapse and have to rush out for air and plunge into cold water. Cracked, sore, infected feet are very common, and they get no chance to heal, soaked as they are continually in a dirty, irritating acid water. I sent in a letter asking for some authority in dealing with the sick. It's terrible at present. Men who cannot walk without support are sent to work.
And every man had to do a certain task each day. But what they never allowed for, as you worked on this face, you got further and further away from the chute in the floor, and you had to carry that stuff. But they still expected the same amount of copper ore got out. And if you didn't produce that, at the end of the day, you got beaten up. And of course, we worked no clothes on, and they used to line you up and make you hold onto a water pipe. And they used to have long hammers. They were supposed to come round and test the roof, see if it was safe, but they never come round, did they? But they'd line you up on this pipe, and they one each side of you, and they'd lace you with the hammer shaft. And they didn't worry where they hit you, did they? No. And from the neck right the way down to your thighs was black and blue.
You can imagine the scene of men shuffling forward, filthy, dirty, often some of them beaten, beriberi, every sort of disease, queuing up to face your father and Corporal Donnelly, all praying and hoping that they would get a white card, which would give them a day's rest, or better still, a red card, which would mean they could lie down and rest in camp. And your father had the job of dispensing white cards and red cards. Literally, as he once said to me, who was going to die and who was not going to die. He said, I'm playing God in this camp. He said this to me once, your father. I have to play God in this camp, and I hate doing it.
September 6th, 1943. The age of miracles has arrived. We've been given 70 white cards to give and take away. Must be the result of my letter. This, plus the 31 in the hospital, makes 101 sick. Our card turnover is very rapid. It has to be. That is, we can seldom give a fever more than a febrile day, or diarrhea more than 3 or 4 days. Injuries have to be sent out before they are completely healed. Hardly ideal or good medicine.
We're walking zombies, really. Walking zombies. So, as I say, although your father never went into that mine, he must have lived it time and time again by facing these men night after night on the medical examinations, and then seeing them when he had them in hospitals, and knowing full well all he was doing was getting them well to go back into that hell again.
We used to have little carbide lamps, you see, a little flame, and the air was so bad and lacking oxygen, these lights would go out, you see. These chaps would step into these shafts and probably drop about 40 feet onto solid rock, and we used to have to, at the bottom of the shafts, where you took off this rock, loading them onto bogies, we'd have to unload all this rock to get these chaps out. So you can imagine what state they were in. You know, they were covered in sort of copper sulfate acid and sort of grime dust and so on. We'd have the job then of transporting them up to the mine, which meant climbing hundreds of steps in the mine levels, and then perhaps another 400 steps up the mountain to the camp, using perhaps a blanket for a stretcher.
Well, in my case, down the mine, I had a big accident. The roof fell, you know, and I had about 10 ton of stuff on top, you know, and I finished up with a broken leg, all the skin off my back, arms were grazed. I was cut to pieces, you know. In this country, it was an hospital job, but they got me back to the camp, and the Major Wheeler, that we all love so well, he made a splint, because we had no medical equipment. He made this splint out of 2 pieces of wood in that sort of shape, you know? And he strapped it to my foot and leg with valise straps. You know valise straps from Army equipment?
Army equipment.
Yeah, and he strapped it to my foot and over my leg and set my leg in this. Now, he made such a good job of this that it didn't have to be moved from then onwards. But the poor Major was unlucky because the wood and the strap grew into my foot. But we still finished up with a good mend on the break, you know. And when he came to take it off, his heart was broken, you know, because there was a strap grown into the top of my foot, and the wood of the splint had grown into the heel of the foot. And I'm still treating the heel today. But thanks to the Major, I can play golf, I can swim, I can run, I can walk.
September 27th, 1943. About 90 letters were distributed in camp today. Most were written in April and early May of this year. As far as I've been able to find out, it was not until April of this year that they knew for certain that we were prisoners. There was bad news in some, which is inevitable, I suppose. I hope and feel that some system has finally been started and that we'll all be getting mail before too long. Nell's 32 today. My darling. If only I could be with her. She will know, though, that I haven't forgotten. If she knows that I'm alive, poor dear. I'm lucky to have my photos. Few have more than snaps, and neither would I if I hadn't given them my first consideration always. How many birthdays will we have apart? Our life seems to have been one succession of partings. This by far the worst. The old, old cry. How long? How long? Are you thinking of me now? I feel you must be.
Nell and Ben had grown up together in the small community of Edgerton, Alberta. As a teenager, he had worked for her family as a harvest hand, saving every cent he could for medical school. They married secretly, lived apart for 2.5 years until he graduated in 1935. Because of the Depression, he could not afford to set up a practice of his own. So as a long shot, he wrote the entrance examinations for the British Indian Medical Service and was accepted. The young couple arrived in London that fall. Nell was pregnant. Ben took a short intensive course in tropical medicine, studying 18 hours a day. There was little time for romance. Only 2 months before their first child was to be born, he had to leave for his posting in India, his first full-time job as a doctor.
October 13th, 1943. Screaming guards. Furious bayonet practice right under our noses. Men getting beaten up for what? Accidents continue, all due to rock falls. The last was a compound depressed fracture of the forehead. We had to remove bone right down to the brain, over an area of about 1.5 inches in diameter on the forehead. The only instrument we have to use for this is an old universal tooth forceps.
Johnny Ford got the drill down through the brain.
He had
broke his brain.
Part of his skull was knocked in, so that he had a piece of bone jammed down, and it broke with the larger inside than outside, so that you got a taper down like that of bone, which couldn't come out. So they had to get the forceps and open his, clean him up, do all his hair up, cut him open and take it out, break it.
And that was without any anaesthetic whatsoever?
They had nothing then to
Absolutely nothing for that.
November 14th, 1943. A year in Formosa, and believe me, a year we will never forget. The Japs brought the men back early from work and gave us a pretty good meal. We had a service for our dead in the afternoon, 39 now in the camp. They also gave bottles of sauce to the men who had worked the longest. One man had not been off a day. As men said, never had so much work been rewarded by so little. We had a concert in the evening. Did the men a lot of good. The female impersonators were especially good, or should I say, bad. I was in it, unwillingly. Thought of you, Ken, on the 4th. Hope Daddy will be there to blow out the candles next year.
This stage, you know, things were so black and depressing, and then suddenly these Japs turned up with all sorts of costumes and musical instruments and tell us there'll be a concert, and which we thoroughly enjoyed at the time, but because we realised then this was purely a propaganda exercise, because they had cameramen and so on there, you see. And the next day, this was all taken away.
November 25th, 1943. The weather has turned colder, with almost constant rain. Men are soaked and chilled morning and evening, and have to put on their wet clothes and soggy rags of shoes again next morning. 2 deaths today. One killed in the mine, lived a few hours. Would have lived some time, though his condition was hopeless. Had I not... Well, I suppose one could only say, put him out of his misery. But no one could tell me I was wrong. The other was a berry of long standing. Lots of colds, bronchitis, tummies, and some pneumonias. Captain Seed has what appears to be anemic hepatitis, with the fever since October 17th. Improving, but it will be a long time before he is fit for much at the best. Papers up to October the 10th are good, but it is altogether too easy to see how we could be here a year from now.
And we hit on a method of stealing Japanese news sheets, which are simple pieces of paper, smuggling them back into camp. I used to read the katakana headlines of them and the dates, and bring them back into camp, and then they'd be interpreted at night time in camp, and between Captain Brown, Sergeant Bingham, Major Crossley, a bulletin would be produced, which was always better than the actual news in the newspapers, because all we had in the newspapers was the names and places of where the war was. We built our own maps in the camp, which we hid away, and so we could build up a news bulletin, I should say. And I was always delighted to be allowed to pass that news bulletin out by word of mouth. And I became known as the Griff Man, and it gave me a terrific uplift to be able to give good news out.
December 19th, 1943. 6 days until Christmas. We've been promised a big feed. Men even sing on their way to work these days. All these changes, I'm sure, are a better indication of how things are really going than any news we are given. One knows the Japs too well by now to think they would change out of mere kindness. They still have a few steps to go, of course, before they be tucking us into bed.
Now they sing to British soldiers who have travelled from afar to fight for king and country now. They're prisoners of war. Down the mine, boy laddie, down the mine, you'll go. Though your feet are lacerated yet, you daren't answer no. Though the rice is not sufficient, and we treat you all like swine, down the mine, bonny laddie, down the mine.
They had nothing but contempt for us as men, because they thought that individually we should either have been killed in battle or personally committed suicide, and honour would have been saved. And so as we were still alive, that we were, in their eyes, were virtually dead men, were of no consequence, and should therefore be treated as such.
Well, one particular day, there was a chappie came in with very large testicles, very. And a Jap walked in and kicked him. And your father was on that side of the table, and I was stood there. He gripped the table and said, "Tomo, stay there," and done no more. Now, we knew for a fact that he was required. If he'd have done anything, it'd have just been finished. He couldn't do a thing till the Jap walked out, then went and picked him up. And then he got to work on him. Now, a man that could have done that, I mean, I was ready for boiling over and doing nothing, but he just said, "Stay there." And right away, you just did that. You just stayed there. You were so cool with him. But that was his way. Nothing seemed to get him down. He was cool. And when I say cool, he was real cool. Nothing seemed to bother him. He just strolled around.
No question. Easy, was it?
Oh, easy.
Easy, was it?
As though he just wasn't there. He didn't care for them. The men come first, and that was the end of it.
December 25th, 1943. Another prisoner of war Christmas. Infinitely better than last year in every way. After the evening meal, there was carol singing. They let us buy some colored paper, too, and we were able to do a little decorating. It has rained all day, but the men are in good spirits, and this evening we had an issue of tea with sugar in it.
God rest ye merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ our Savior was born on
No touch tonight. One. No good. Okay.
not a happy day, I'm afraid, for most of us. Too many memories attached to it. Perhaps it's better that it is not very much like Christmas, because that would make the memories even more vivid. All day, of course, I've been trying to picture home, the tree I know Nellie must have for the boys, and what presents I would like to give them all. Next year, surely. Christmas dinner, too. I could do a lot to one, but I shouldn't complain. We had rice and boiled vegetable as usual, but also had 4 oranges and a piece of battered pork. Why, oh why did you marry little me? We were a worried couple, weren't we? I felt so helpless, and you were so brave. I loved you all I knew how, but somehow it seems little compared to what I feel for you now. In this God-forsaken place, freedom and life means you, Nettie. May the day come when we will be together with our children in our own home. Good night, my love.
The only home that Mom and Dad had really shared was in India. When she joined them with their new son Harry in 1936, they began to raise a family. A second son, Kenneth, was born, and while the depression at home continued and the war broke out in Europe, their lives seemed insulated from the rest of the world. Then shortly after a third son, Alan, was born, Ben was ordered to Malaya without his family. It was quickly decided that Nell and the boys would return to Edgerton. Thinking he would soon get a leave and they could join up in Canada, they said their goodbyes. March 8th, 1941.
January 4th, 1944. I've made no resolutions this year. What is there to resolve? Or have I made any guesses as to the end of all this? What's the use? We've nothing to go on. Maybe this year, pray God it is, but just as likely from what we know, it may not. Life is becoming, or has become, real. Natural. Whereas all else seems so far away, almost like another world, or a dream. One thinks of home and all the rest as much, but it just isn't as sharp, not as clear as it was at first, though I cannot put it into the right words. 34 letters came on the 29th. From what the Nips said, we thought there were many more, but apparently not. Perhaps having gone so long, it was better to keep on without. Certainly one wants letters, longs for some word. But with the increased homesickness, it would be a mixed blessing. And if there should be some bad news, God forbid, I'd sooner not hear of it here. So helpless and so much time to think and do nothing. Food, especially vegetable, is slipping more and more. Officers are now cut to 390 grams of rice as compared to men working 655. And sick, something like 370 grams. Vegetables lately are almost wholly alfalfa, merely boiled worms and all. The Jap rule is no work, less food. It just means that we share out, of course, and everyone gets less.
We used to say in our camps, you can do anything in this camp. You can be any religion you like. You can be any political party you like. You can have any belief you like. There's one unwritten law in a prison camp. You do nothing to harm your mates. You don't do anything Jap happy. In other words, you don't do something which will cause harm on your mates. I think it was the ideal socialist society, if you like, because we shared everything. Everything was shared. The medicine was shared, the doctors were shared, the food was shared. We even shared the ground, the ultimate, when you were buried. It was the ultimate in living. There were no women. There was no need of women. We didn't want women. The sex urge went years ago. There was no talk of women. Normally, when soldiers are together, that's about the first thing, sex. The first thing was food. It was always food, 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 and the hope of survival.
February 18th, 1944. Darling's the best day since I've been a prisoner. 3 letters from you, 2 from Mother. All of you well and everything. News of my whereabouts only arrived in June of 43. But perhaps there was some word from the War Office before then. I hope so. Nell mentions having sent snaps and going to send more. Hope I can get some. But I'm very lucky to get the letters, and so will not complain. I've only read the letters twice so far. I want the joy of nibbling at them over and over again. How well I can picture every inch of the house. The yard, the lake, all the country around. I suppose you're in the big bedroom, Nell. On a soft mattress, you say? I don't know what it would feel like after so many months of these boards. Only I could try it with you beside me. And we'd play too, honey, as you say. But Nettie, I'd have to be fed on something more than rice. March 3rd, 1944. The Japs now have some peculiar game on, in which we are all to be photographed praying for world peace. If only they took the men coming back from work, or in the hospital. We and the orderlies were taken separately. They made us hold books and sit in a group. What a false impression. The appendix is doing well. A miracle. He's in the clear now. I wouldn't have given him much for his chances the day of the operation.
Everyone ready? Bite down.
Stay as still as you can, lady. Stay as still as you can.
He operated on people with razor blades. I've seen him do an operation on a man from Yorkshire, and he had trouble with his kidney. He had an abscess on the kidney. He operated with a razor blade, and he cut into chalky white. This is a nickname we give this fella, chalky white. He operated with a single razor blade, no anaesthetic, he was just held in position. And he cut and he inserted the valve rubber of a cycle. You know this valve rubber that they put on the valve of an inner tube of a bike? He inserted a valve rubber into that and drained the abscess. Chalky White came home. He came home back to England.
Blackouts are becoming more strict and warnings more common. Planes have been about several times. We've heard a few faint explosions. I'm convinced it's the real thing this time. It's certainly raising the men's morale.
Our anthem had become in the mine actually at the time, the Yanks are coming. We used to sing that in the mine as we were coming towards the entrance for the benefit of a Japanese guard who knew English. And I used to always lead the singing because I was Welsh. It was one thing Crossley used to say to me, and your father, get some singing going, Jack. And it used to be very hard sometimes to get singing going. I sung carols at Christmas time with a small party. And as we were coming towards the end, we'd always think, the Yankees are coming, the Yankees are coming. Over there, they're coming, you know. And this chap used to get very annoyed.
June 4th, 1944. Some Red Crosses come in. 70 new books and softballs, a bat, and for some reason, 2 slide rules. There's a collection of medical supplies as well. A marvelous feeling to have something to work with for at least a month, even though some of it is a little unusual. The spirit of the men is high, partly due to games on our postage stamp of a parade ground, and lately some good rumors. The last big one is that Hitler was killed by a bomb at Christmas.
And I remember when it was first sent round, the word was sent round that Dr. Wiggle had decided he wanted the powdered milk. What the hell, why should we all got the same chance to live? Why should I give up my section of the it was only a pass between about 5 or 6 men. Why should I give up my section of the powdered milk to the sick? But I remember him coming to the meeting and convincing all the camp leaders, I was a camp leader, of the importance of us, and asking us to go back to our squads, to appeal to our squads. And we took a vote, and he won. This was a measure of the respect of the men for him.
August 31st, 1944. I have plenty of headaches in the way of patients these days, especially one poor lad whose back was broken on the 11th. Complete paralysis from the breast down. Very little hope there will be any recovery. Most difficult nursing under these conditions. He has no control so far, or very little, over urine, and is constipated.
Now, the chances of survival with a broken back are pretty remote, you know. Anyway, the Major took in Doherty, and he made a bed.
It was more like a cradle, really,
yes,
wasn't it?
with sand. And then he set Doherty in this, because this man's paralysed now from the waist downwards, and he cannot move. Now, the Major insisted that every day, all day, the sick patients that were able to move was to go in there and massage the legs of Doherty to keep his muscles in his legs alive and movable. And there was Sergeant O'Toole and myself and young Hans Kirkby, who had a broken arm that the Major just repaired, or was repairing at the time. And the job was we had to sit there hour after hour massaging the legs of this man to keep his muscles pliable. And this went on for day after day after day. And after months, I was present the first day when Doherty's toe moved, and I could have cried. And you must feel that way too, because to see that toe just flicker and know that that man has got his nerves working again in his muscle, and you've done, and the Major, and it was only through the Major insisting and giving us the strength to carry on massaging this man's leg that made this man live.
You saw him ride the bike they made up there?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't a bike, it was half the style of a bike, but instead of having pedals that turned, they was 2 planks that paddled, like, see, and they had blocks of concrete on. And they got him on this bike, and he used to work his legs. And eventually, he walked around that little sick bay, didn't he? And we left the camp, we had to go to Japan, but they tell us that he actually walked out of the camp.
Yeah, he walked
unaided.
out of the camp.
September 24th, 1944. Since the middle of the month, a kind of influenza has broken out. Every day we have 20 or 30 men with fever, often high, and most of them have to go to work because the Japs won't give us cards for them. Our intestines and stomachs seem to get so sensitive that they cannot deal with anything solid. And as rice is the beginning and the end of our diet, it means really a slow, wasting decline, or starvation to death. many who are now and long have been on the downward path won't see next spring. October 25th, 1944. Captain Seed is weaker and has dropped from 70 to 53 kilos in 4 months. I put him in hospital on the best diet we can provide. I have 1 syringe, the last of my kit, and have begun giving him small blood transfusions. It's the last card I have. I keep pretty busy with him being sick. I'm afraid I'm not so methodical as he never changes or hurries his pace. If there's work, I tend to rush it and get it behind me. Still, I'm on my feet most of the time from 7:30 in the morning till 7 p.m., 7 days a week.
Your father, as I say, had his low moments, I think, when Seed was very ill, and he was trying to as I say, save Seed. But this particular night, I remember very well this committee meeting when we had this decision to make, and this decision was, who should he save? Should he save Captain Seed, or should he save one of the men who was in the death hut? Or should he just dispense the little drugs he had left and let them all die? And I think he felt that he'd had enough playing God, and he wanted to probably give somebody else a decision, so he'd asked Major Crossley and the officers. And Major Crossley brought it to the camp committee, and I was in the camp committee, and we were asked what we thought. And it was a terrible decision to make. And what would you have done? Who would you have saved? Would you have saved this doctor, who was valuable because he had the knowledge of the months before Major Wheeler arrived, and would have been invaluable to him because the camp went to 1,000 men? Or would you have saved one of those other men, and there were some marvelous characters dying, and then there was Freddie Bradley, who was dying hard, who'd had his fractured spine in the mine, and they'd been fighting to keep him alive. Freddie became a symbol for the camp. While Freddie was alive, we used to feel it was hope. They were turning Freddie over day by day. You could see his back being eaten away with sores, you know. And Freddie used to put his thumb up to us through the window. And would he have saved Freddie, or would he have saved any of the others? Anyway, he asked us, who would we save? Who would you have saved? Yeah? What would you have done? Would you save the doctor? Would you save one of the men?
Well, if it was a decision of the mind, I guess one would say the doctor, but I don't suppose it was a decision.
That would have been the logical decision. That would have been the logical decision, and I know there were others of the committee who felt that way. But the majority decision was give them all the same chance. And I'm convinced that's what the decision Major Wheeler wanted.
Worms continue to be vomited up. I'm beginning to think that they are a factor in many of these gastrointestinal cases. In one case, it was certainly the cause. He complained of severe epigastric pain and had a fever of more than 100 degrees during that night. And the next day, he vomited at odd times 18 worms, some of them 10 to 12 inches long. And on the basis of some 40 or 50 stools I've examined, mainly of cases of diarrhea, I should say it is no exaggeration to assume that 50% of us have worms, at least. One death on the 11th, Freddie Bradley. Put up a tremendous fight. Fractured dislocation of dorsal spine with multiple ulcers. Lived just 2 months. Major Crossley and I have made out the points that we're going to ask the commander for in an interview on the sick situation, which I really consider to be as serious as it has ever been. And we are bound to have many deaths if these men have to put another winter in here, even on the sick list, let alone being driven down the mine.
One was obviously sad insofar that they were all your own... In fact, they were more than comrades, they were family by this time. You know, one knew these chaps better than one's own family and so on, and so it was, you know, it was a sort of personal tragedy every time one died. We had a burial ground on the hillside, which was a paddy terrace. We were allowed 4, later 6 people to take them across, with perhaps a little presento of fruit and flowers. We were only given a limited amount of time, so obviously it was a very shallow grave. And with this tropical rain that we were having, consequently these graves became exposed because the rain used to cascade down the mountainside. And this is where the other two came in, because while we were burying one chap, the other two chaps would be sort of dashing around, covering up the other bodies, you know, which had been exposed.
We had in the camp a Roman Catholic priest who was a Jesuit, who flatly refused, we hadn't a Church of England padre, who flatly refused to bury anybody who was not Roman Catholic. This has been one of the things that's always worried me and always annoyed me. It's a thing which I reported to the War Office after the war, and they said there was nothing they could do about it. Anybody who would, or was a Roman Catholic, or who even would convert on their deathbed, he would bury them. But the rest, either myself or one of the other officers had to bury.
And I remember one time one man died, saying to him, "What did he die of, Major Wheeler?" And he said, "Sergeant Edwards, he's died of dysentery, malnutrition, famine, edema." He said the symptoms are in the Bible, famine, edema, but most of all, he's died of disinclinitis. And I said, "Major Wheeler, what's disinclinitis?" And he said, "That's no more inclination to live." He said, "And that's the most important disease in this camp."
I've seen chaps who were, you know, completely hopeless cases survive. Even the doctor has said, you know, we've not got much chance with this chap, and he's made an amazing recovery. And some fellas, they just give up the ghost, and it's almost like a form of witchcraft. You know, they just said, "I've had enough," and turned over and died.
I remember another thing he said to me once. A man had died overnight, and he said to me, "He's escaped in his sleep." I remember Major Wheeler saying that to me. He said, "Sergeant Edwards, he's escaped in his sleep." And literally, it was so easy to escape in your sleep. I remember sometimes I didn't want to wake up sometimes. If you're having a nice dream, I didn't want to wake up. I didn't want to wake up in that reality.
Two letters today from Nell with snaps, both written just more than a year ago. But the snaps, honey, somehow have made me feel nearer than since all this began. You look lovely, dearest, as always, though they didn't get in your hat. You certainly all look well, and there can be little lack of food. What real boys they are. I only would have recognized Ken. Harry's changed a lot, all his baby softness gone. And of course Alan was only a baby. But I'm so proud. And who wouldn't be? We certainly will have our honeymoon, dear. You'll have to meet me when I land. Oh yes, darling, how I love you and long for you. On October 19th, the NIP suddenly told me 100 sick men were to be sent off, and except to check them, gave me a free hand. They said if they could walk, they could be included. I took it literally and put down the worst 100 of at least 250 or 300 unfit. The men we sent, lined up to go, was one of the most heartbreaking sights I've ever seen. All like skeletons except for those swollen with edema. Few seeming with strength enough to be very excited about a new chance. Broken down, burned out humans. May we never forget it. Ever.
We used to say there was only two ways out of Kinkasaki, head first or feet first. In other words, you got carried out dead or you got carried out to another camp to try and get fit again. Some men even came back to Kinkasaki and died. And it was a mark of death on them when they came back.
This is apparently the only camp still working, and by far the worst on the island in every way. Others are doing very little, and no work comparable to this.
Amoebic dysentery, I had amoebic dysentery. He had amoebic dysentery, they all had amoebic. What would you do with it? The major said rice water only for these people. So they boiled rice and rice till they finished up with nothing but rice water, so it wasn't tearing at the stomach. Then you've got to, after you've softened the bowels and got them accepting food, or capable of accepting food, you've got to start hardening something up. He ground charcoal down. We was charcoal. That charcoal ground into a powder. This was this man. He was fantastic. He was a genius.
November 7th, 1944. 83 cases of dysentery in the last 2 months. 29 in the last 7 days. 2 more deaths. Both the old malnutrition, diarrhea, edema. Many dread the mine so much they'd rather die. There's no incentive to get well, and not a few, for that reason, help things along, even to eventual death. Funny, I used to think I'd become bone lazy, and yet I honestly don't think that any man here would suggest that I'm lazy. So perhaps there's some hope for me in general practice back home.
But I think above all, his character showed through in the fact that you had a belief in him, even no matter if he was just giving you a bit of burnt rice rubbed together, powdered. It was a medicine, you know, and he was dispensing medicine in the only way he could, with the little bit of drugs he had and the moral support he would try and give you. And all the conversations I had with him, this is the thing that I remember used to come over so strongly from him. The fact that he used to try and build up your hope to live day to day. He would never give up, he never gave up hope.
When we was in the camps, and you used to start now and again feel a little bit sorry for yourself, the only way you could give vent to your feelings was to cover your head with a blanket and have a damn good cry. And this night I was really low, and this happened to me. And just after I'd had this fit of crying, your dad come round and come up on the bed space and asked me how I was, and from then onwards I knew that I was going to get over it. I really did, and I didn't look back. I came out of it all right, didn't I?
That's right.
But you see, he had to be a doctor, priest, confessor, everything. The officers in charge of our camp, you know, had to be that, like Crossley. They were wonderful men. The camp wouldn't have existed. We would just gone to pieces without them.
I sometimes wondered how he did survive. Like us all, he was sort of skin and bone, very, probably less than 100 pounds in weight, and as I say, eating the same food and that, and probably doing 4 times as much as anybody else.
December 9th, 1944. More and more men are falling off, not unlike caged animals, losing all appetite, quickly going down and down. No signs at present of more sick being sent off, and I hate to think what our death rate will be in the next few months as the men are now. It's been bitterly cold these days. That is, in the 50s. It's terrible for the sick and for those in huts with diarrhea, such as Captain Seed and Stewart, who have to go out from 2 to 5 times a night. They have to negotiate over 150 yards of mud, crude stone steps, all in complete blackout and driving rain.
They had to, I remember now, they had to put a whole hut aside for dysentery cases at that period, and your father was working day and night on trying to cope with the dysentery. And even the Japanese got scared. They sent a Captain Chumi from HQ to come to the camp. And I know all the result was we got more toilet paper provided. Is that another small thing that is? You see, that there wasn't even such a thing as toilet paper. And you imagine the problems with dysentery cases. Cases were beds, so the work that your dad and those medical orderlies had to do was indescribable.
December 29th, 1944. No news. No nothing. Rain every day. About 90 inches now for December. we should touch the 100-inch mark. I have one small room, the only place we can begin to do much for the helpless. 13 have died there this month. In fact, in a month, none have come out alive. It's even more staggering to me this year, as the sick very definitely have less stamina in them and die. A year ago, they would have at least weeks of fight left. An unpleasant task is mine, but one must not forget, though I myself know how little I can do, that the men have tremendous confidence and hope in one. Strange, but it's a fact. So I suppose one does some good that way. The enemy, that is time, moves but slowly. How little a list of casualties tells the real story of war. So help me, Nettie. I'll have no desire to wander if I once get out of here whole and alive.
And I remember saying to him, oh, Major Wheeler, for God's sake, get me out of here. Get me out of this death hut. I remember him saying to me, I'll do my best. I'll come and see you tomorrow. He came every night. I don't know how long I was in there, Anne. I wasn't in there a short period, but I remember him coming in every night into that death hut to climb up and crawl alongside and speak to each of those men, you know, and try and give them some comfort and try and jolly them along, I used to call it, jollying men along, because literally they had very little in the way of... And it wasn't until last year Donnelly told me actually how they saved me. He sat in my home last year and told me how he and Major Wheeler pulled this worm from me, and he said it was on a string, and he said if the string had broken and the worm had gone back in, that would have been your lot, because evidently the worm was strangling my inside. But your dad and bless him, Dave Donnelly, were responsible for saving me.
April 3rd, 1945. The Nips have agreed to send another sick party off. The men have urged me to go too. They're right. My own health is such that if I stay here much longer, I'll be of no use to anyone, and there may not be another chance to leave. The men presented me with a nicely done card with all their signatures. On the back, they had written the words, "Better you should forget and smile than you should remember and be sad." We had 12 on stretchers, including Stewart and Seed. Trip was usual for those conducted by our friends and lasted 24 hours. No one died on the journey. Some may yet die because of it. April 23rd, 1945. This new camp is lovely. Space inside to walk a little. A terrific tonic after so long in the gloomy north. Everyone has been extremely kind to me, and I'm told that I'm to have a break. So, now I run the lab during the morning, and I'm enjoying it, but often feel lost after 2.5 years of routine 7 days a week. There's so little food now that there's no point in having 3 meals a day, and it's been cut to 2 feedings, which are both very small. Most of the men are sick. The majority are my old patients, broken down by the mine. Captain Badgett, the dentist who came on the boat, is here. A great find.
Oh yes, one day I took out a tooth for a Japanese, and he was very pleased, and he gave me a piece of meat. And it was already cooked, and on the few occasions. And I thought of Peter, who was swollen up and needed protein. And so I took it back to him. But on the way back, I must say to my shame that I licked it. But I gave it to Peter, and Peter wouldn't accept it, but I made him. I said, you've got to have this. This is the stuff for you. But he didn't know I'd licked it.
June 19th, 1945. Captain Stewart died. I watched him slowly starve, is the only way to put it, for just about 1 year. Captain Seed seems definitely well around the corner. Why, I do not know, nor does he. Yesterday, P-38s machine-gunned the camp, running right along one hut. By some miracle, no one was hit. All in all, one cannot help but be nervously on edge. Wonder when it's going to end, how, and especially what our friends will be like. The Nips have really tightened up on discipline the last week or so, and as in the old days, it's a hazard to step outside the door. There are beatings and slappings. This last while, with no news, no rumors, this most monotonous waiting, hoping. The days have gone slowly. So slowly.
We were the last survivors at the mining camp. By this time, Dr. Whelan had gone off with some very sick people, and there was just a minimum number of us, and we finished up by having to be taken to a jungle camp, which was just, I think, an excuse to work us to death, you know. I mean, we'd really given up hope, you know. We were all sick men. Until the end of the war, I think we had about 6 weeks to live. That's my estimate for myself, and I think it's applied to all the other chaps there.
The Japanese did have plans to exterminate, if you like is the word, of which we've got proof. I have somewhere in my thing the actual order to say this would be carried out, and those were the Japanese high command orders that in the event of the Americans invading Formosa, there were to be no prisoners left alive.
August 29th, 1945. The war is over. But somehow it seems an anticlimax. The Japs are still here. They are bowing and scraping with an entirely different attitude, and the food is improved. But we know there is still a large army in Tohoku, and it is hard to feel that we are really out of the woods as long as they are still on the island.
Well, the end came, and we were told the Americans were going to drop food on us, so we were absolutely excited. The thought of food coming down from the skies on us. And these 3 B-29s came out of the skies, and they came circling, and we were running around cheering, waving our arms, you know. And they came lower and lower, and eventually they came right down on top of us, and whoosh, down the stuff came. And it was chaos, because the parachutes didn't open, of course, they were too low. And the food and everything was in huge containers like oil drums. And I remember the fellow alongside me, his arm taken right off where the first lot that came down. I was bowled completely over with the drag of the parachute, flattened into this paddy field. And the next stick fell right across the main hut we were in. And there in that hut were all the sick men. So we had 3 killed and 22 injured in the first drop. It was the time when I know I went to pieces. It was the time when I did go to pieces as a POW. I kept myself pretty good, but I went to pieces that time, and I was given the biggest telling off by Crossley that I ever had. And he still remembers it. We were talking about it on my last leave. And I reminded him. He gave me the biggest bawling out I ever had because I lost myself, and made me get the men together after the drop and get them organised and get them to picking up the supplies and picking up the pieces, you know, because we were shattered. We were absolutely shattered, you know, that the food had come down and killed, blown us a pulp, you know.
But the thing is that what the chaps wanted first was not pork and beans, cigarettes. And we just grabbed all the cigarettes, distributed them all around the camp as quickly as we could, particularly those in the hospital, or so-called hospital. And that's what people wanted most. That's what people wanted first.
My dearest Nell, an era has ended, and I'm coming home. The Americans have arrived in the nick of time, I feel, and life has changed incredibly in the past few days. We've all been weighed. I was down to 95 pounds, but I should gain a lot before I see you.
I was a bit frightened because we disarmed the Japs, given them the rifles back and told them to stand guard on us, the main gates, to stop people coming in the camp. And at midnight I said, I'd already appointed an adjutant then, I said, look, this camp is too quiet, I don't like it. Because the day before, what these chaps were going to do to the Japs was nobody's business. They were going to cut them up into small pieces. And quite honestly, I couldn't have blamed them. I'd have had to try and stop them, but I couldn't have blamed them. So at midnight, this was after the Red Cross supplies had been dropped, and there were stacks of them, cigarettes, sweets, chocolates, everything. I went round the camp with my adjutant. I said, where are the Jap guards? Couldn't see one anywhere. So we went farther, and all the men were sat in little groups, having tea and eating sweets, smoking like chimneys. And there, in every group, were 3 or 4 Japanese sharing these cigarettes and these sweets. This is something I would never have believed, but that's typically British.
I must leave my memories of the past few years behind, but I can honestly say that I do not harbor the hate and resentment I thought I would against the Japanese. Many have killed themselves rather than suffer the dishonor of being a prisoner of war. Such a different philosophy of life and death.
Well, about 2 days later, I was feeling all in, and it was about 2 o'clock, and an orderly came and said, I was on my bed, the orderly came and said, there's some Americans outside. So in comes an American officer with pineapples all over him and hand grenades and what have you, Tommy guns, followed by 3 tough-looking guards with a bottle of bourbon in his hand. He said, get some of that in. So I said, no, thank you, but I had an American doctor with me who decided he'd like it, so I had no further trouble with him that day. But then this American officer said, how soon can you clear out of the camp? So I said, 5 minutes. And I put the order out straight away. I said, right, 5 minutes, the camp is evacuated. Take what you want with you, but leave anything else. Don't even bother about tidying it up.
I wonder what the boys will think of their dad after all this time. Surely they don't remember me, but we won't be strangers for long. I'm so anxious to be the father they've never had. I thought a lot of what we shall do now. How lucky we are to have this second chance at life together. For we have each other, and what else really matters. I've tried to do the best by these men, Nettie. But in so many cases, it hasn't been enough. I'll be the last to leave this place. Men are still dying, and many aren't fit to travel. So I'll stay until the end. Perhaps I'll be home by November. I swear we will never be apart again. Give kisses to the boys, and to you, all my love. As ever, Ben.
The effect of that on our lives is like a piece of wood in the sea. You know, a piece of wood goes in the sea for a long time, and all the soft bit gets washed away, and you're left with the hard core. And I think that's the way we were left. That's what it did to our characters. I think it did something to your father's character. I think it hardened us, but it taught us a lot. It taught us the best and worst, where the best and worst in men are, because that experience brought out the best and worst in men. There's no doubt about that. It brought out the worst side of a man and brought out the best side of a man. It brought out ultimate courage, because nobody is there. It's not a battlefield. You're not fighting the soldiers on a battlefield, you know. You're fighting an enemy. You're already defeated. Yet you had to go on fighting. You had to go on struggling and fighting every day. And your father was fighting his war by trying to keep us alive and keeping our spirits up. He was fighting his war in that way. I fought my war building up the news service and getting news sheets into the camp and doing what I could that way. And I worked closely with Major Crossley and Major Wheeler in that sense in the camp. And I think it, through going to the depths as we did, it gave us an insight in life that few men get. I've often sat down and made a balance sheet of my period in the camp, and I find now, after all these years, I can find pluses, a lot of pluses, which I couldn't do after the war. It was all negatives then. Now I can find pluses, because no matter what happens to me now, it can never be as bad again. It can never be as bad again. I'm not afraid of death. I'm not afraid of anything that happens now, because it can never be as bad again after going through that experience in that camp and seeing also what experience it had on your father and others who had worse problems than I had.
This is where our family lived during the 50s in Edmonton, Alberta. It was a happy home, full of Mum's music, most of it wartime music. She'd played for dances to support the family during those difficult years. Ben and Nell celebrated their 25th anniversary here. A surprise party given by those who loved them well. A mock wedding to make up for the one they never had. In all my years of growing up, I never heard my father complain about his poor health or talk about the war. He did warn Mum that their time together was precious little. He died in 1963. It wasn't until I was almost 30 that I read his diary.